Ladies and gentlemen, get the book Dr. Joshua Bowen wrote, The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. It is extremely full of knowledge and information for anyone, as well as join the Patreon. There's hundreds of videos that have not released to the internet. You can ask questions and I will record them with these scholars in high definition. I do that all the time. You can also personal message me and you help the community grow. Thanks a lot. Dr. Joshua Bowen, I have a wonderful Patreon member that actually supports what we do here, and so I get their questions first. It's Sherry Clem, and I hope I pronounced your name right, Sherry, because I've seen your face around here and there. And she has a really good question. It's like when you ask, when the kids go, "Where did God come from?" And you're like,
ask your mother.
Yeah. That's a question beyond my understanding. Well, this is one of those. And it says, where did the whole idea of deities come from anyway? And what was the purpose of doing so? And so just to set up for our audience sake, I think what she's saying is, like, where did the idea of gods at all come from? There's probably an evolutionary way of explaining this, I'm sure, with agency beyond ourselves. And I think that in nature, we can look around and say, look, that river's pretty strong. It has a personality, or like I do. We project, everything has something like we do, and we live in our minds. So our minds are what we project onto the world, and the trees and that thunderstorm was powerful. So things sometimes even more powerful than ourselves, other natural things that are more powerful, the sun, whatever it might be, end up becoming personified or in some sense worshipped. And then over time, they build character and evolve into more complex things. That's kind of where I'm going with it, but maybe you can dive deep into this.
Yeah, I mean, as I always say, like not my area of specialization. However, so there was an Assyriologist that wrote a book. His name is Torkel Jakobsen. And it's Treasures of Darkness, I think. Treasures in Darkness. But he basically talks about this idea of the numinous, which I think if you've been a Christian in particular, even maybe if you've been more of a Pentecostal, charismatic persuasion, that idea of like interacting with the divine, it maybe is more real or to you. But he talks about how people are interacting with the numinous and maybe classifying it. And I'm pulling this from memory, so hopefully no one will judge me if I misquote anything. But essentially he breaks it down based on the different millennia. So he goes through the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd millennia in Mesopotamia. And in the 4th millennium, you have essentially these deities being equated with the actual phenomena. So the sun, the storm cloud, the river, as you were saying, like those things are the deities. But as culture develops, you have kings reigning, like urban centers. These things develop and solidify. It gets, as you say, it gets sort of projected. They start to identify the divine realm with the ruling aspects of their culture. And so there's more of a personification that comes to in their minds to exist for, okay, the gods are more anthropomorphic and they have a similar structure to actually what we see ruling. And so you have individual city-states which have individual rulers. Well, each city has its own deity, right? And this plays into somebody like, in my book, I talk about a ruler by the name of Urukagina. And Urukagina has this like thing that he does where he sort of he aligns himself in a way and his family with the divine family of the city. And so you're supposed to, as a good, patron of the deity of the city. You're supposed to give things to the deity. Well, I'm his representative, essentially. My family is a representative here in the city. So just give them to me, right? Is the long and short of it. Right? Give them to me. Jacobson argues that further develops in the second millennium, this Old Babylonian period, Middle Babylonian period, Middle Assyrian period. This develops into more of like a personal deity, where you've got, there's a more caring aspect to it. But yeah, that's probably more detailed than the person was asking. But it does seem to be that it comes from this more general, thinking about the actual elements and the power that we see, and it gets honed, maybe. It evolves, as you said, at least in the ancient Near East, to more align with their experience. And this is reflected in, texts that talk about the care of the gods over you, and you start to see theodicies because they're thinking more through. The deity is supposed to care for you, and that's becoming a more pertinent aspect to the divine, the role of the divine. And of course, you see this in things like the law collections. If you look at the laws of Hammurabi, and again, it's not that this starts in the second millennium and it doesn't exist in the third, because that's not the case. It never is like that. But you see in like the laws of Hammurabi is talking about how he's this great caretaker of the people, and he cares for them, and that's something that the gods want. And of course, you see this in the first millennium. So I guess what I'm saying is that deities, I think, go from more raw power, maybe, and become more and more personified in Mesopotamia, and seem to take on a role ultimately of more of a caregiving, at least for the people that worship them.
I think that we see that kind of worldwide. I think there was a scholar who talked about Native American gods, and it goes right into animals a lot. Animals play a huge role in certain deities, the bear and the wolf, and there's certain, I guess they put them as powers, sometimes greater than humans, and over time they get like that personification. But it's a wonderful question to ask, because if we can riddle that or solve that riddle, so to speak, I think it does. The reason why you and me aren't Christians today, for example, not because we don't believe in morality and love people.
It's because I want to sin. I mean, let's just be honest.
Let's get it out of the... No, I think it does boil down to exactly what we're talking about here once you've kind of understood what you're dealing with. But, we're not trying to downplay any experiences and things. But the point is once you see the magic trick and how it develops, you kind of have a hard time accepting the narrative any longer. And I do think education does play a huge role in that. I'm not trying to say that makes you smarter. No, that just makes you aware of things that some people may not be willing to even accept for whatever emotional reasons. And
I mean, I think at a minimum, it creates more complexities that you have to then incorporate into your model of reality. And certainly that was the case for me. And as you say, like, not trying to knock anyone, I have very good friends. You and I have very good friends that are evangelical scholars. But they have taken the same complexities that I see, that you see, with the data, with the text, with archaeology and all these things. And they've been able to, in their minds, incorporate them into the Christian model of reality. And, which especially over like the past 100 years, where we've moved away from more fundamentalist approaches, biblical scholars have moved away from fundamentalism. And the reason is because those things were no longer tenable. You don't have the walls of Jericho. You don't have the conquest. You don't have the Exodus, the way that the biblical text portrays it. And so Christian scholars have had to adapt, and to be able to say, all right, that level, a good example of this, I think, is there's a scholar by the name of Randall Rouser. I think I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. He's on Twitter quite a bit, and he wrote a book. It's actually on the shelf here, called Jesus Loves the Canaanites, I think is what the title is. And he embraces the fact that the Old Testament text has these, what we would consider to be atrocities today in them. And he doesn't blush at that. He doesn't try to defend Old Testament slavery or Old Testament genocide. He has, in his theological approach, his theological model, he can incorporate those things in such a way that it doesn't
stop him from
nullify. It doesn't nullify his belief. And I think he and Gregory Boyd follow similar theological approaches. But that's just the example that I give to try to say that the more you learn, some people like me go, all right, this is just too much. Even though I could figure out a theological way to answer this, even though I could figure out a theological way to say, okay, maybe the prophecy against Tyre in Ezekiel 26 could fail, but God was still behind it. Even though I could plausibly perhaps come up with a way to do that, it doesn't seem reasonable to me. Whereas other scholars will say, I'm okay with it. And that's fine. But I think the key is to be able to, everybody has to start on the right foot. Everybody has to start with the right data points and say something like, did the prophecy fail? Is there slavery in the Hebrew Bible? Is there genocide against the Canaanites or the Amalekites? We have to be able to start with those data points and then take those data points and incorporate them into a model, whatever model we decide to use.
There's so much that just comes up when you said all this. I mean, like, so many things really.
I could see you behind the camera like,
Well, there's just so much that comes to heart. I mean, one of the things is, as we advance, like you talked about the fourth, the third, the second millennium, God starts to evolve. God changes as they anthropomorphize or whatever they do. Okay, they change. He's not just the sun anymore, and the stars and the river and whatever it might be, a natural phenomena, earthquake, etc., volcano. All of these things play huge roles, and then they later on become more complex with God. God gets a little more complex, and then at some point it gets so complex that you have Christians believing everything science says just about, other than maybe theoretical physics with like people like Lawrence Krauss who say everything can come from nothing, from some theoretical.
but give it time.
Yeah.
Give it time.
Exactly. So like after that, God will fit within that somehow for people who finally might, if that becomes the mainstream thing and it actually is something we can show. I'm just saying, like, it seems like a version of cognitive dissonance is what happens in humanity. And this is not like calling out any particular group. This is across the board. Everyone is practicing these things. And where I think religion tells on itself, its own deities tells on itself over time, especially ones that are apocalyptic, especially. I mean, once you start making claims, you're in trouble.
Once you draw that line in the sand. But again, you know, even as we see all the time, even in spite of Matthew 24s, you know, those types of things. I mean, they did in the ancient world; they do it now. The prophecies in Daniel doesn't come about. Get into the first millennium CE, and all of a sudden, Daniel didn't really get that in Second Esdras. You know, actually, it was about Rome.
Everything,
but that wasn't really revealed to him, right? Or Jesus prophesies that this generation will not pass away, and when time goes by, and you have the writer of 2 Peter 3 in that where it's at, where he says that not my field. But he says don't consider this to some people consider this to be God being slack, but don't you think that, because God, He hasn't come back yet, but it's just because he's being merciful. So
Yeah.
that's why I say it may be the case that if we wake up tomorrow and a scientist says irrefutable evidence that the that the universe is like cyclical or whatever, that it's always expanding and contracting. There is no beginning to the universe in that ultimate sense, that there is no uncaused cause. It's just always been going. I don't think that Christianity stops. Because I think it may, I'd be happy to be proven wrong, as I am about everything, but not that I'm proven wrong about everything, but I'm happy to be proven wrong about everything. But I think that humans, particularly in this vein, are very good at adapting to their surroundings. And that includes things like this that, again, these rationalizations, these post hoc rationalizations, that you can make it fit. You can make it fit.
Thank you.